The last time, does anybody guess the last time he spoke to this group? We'd have him every month if we could. 5 years ago today, to this date. That's pretty cool. But there was a reason. I was supposed to do a thing on the Migratory Bird Act, and I had to go to the hospital for some scratch I had that got infected. And they called me and said, "Who are we going to get?" I said, "Call Jim Gray. He has a lot of good bird pictures." So Jim substituted for me 5 years ago today. But we've seen him because he comes to a lot of our events. And you're liable to see Jim anywhere, Fort DeSoto, any of the outside taking pictures. He loves taking pictures. So he's got some links that we put on for his stuff is on the website. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim. He's got some awesome pictures.
Five years ago, they spelled my name correctly in the announcement. It's Gray. Thank you. Anyway, that is a swamp hibiscus native to Florida, commonly found on rivers and wetlands. Beautiful flower though.
It's growing up like a tree-like bush.
Related to the hibiscus.
So it grows pretty big, right? The bush that it's on, almost like a tree.
Sorry?
It grows on a large bush or a tree.
It doesn't get real bushy.
No?
It's the flower is the most spectacular thing about it. You know, nowadays, I probably should have used a spoonbill instead. Anyway, when I showed some photos 5 years ago, this is one of the stars of the photo, this delinquent little ghost crab. But I'm going to try very hard to not show you too many photos that I did show 5 years ago. This photo here is dedicated to Kent Bailey. He was master of ceremonies 5 years ago when I showed some photos over at the library. And he loved my swallowtail kite pictures. And his family approached me after he died and wanted this photo for something they made up in his memory. Okay, have any fishermen in the house? Oh, great. Well, I'm a fishaholic, more specifically a snookaholic for years. Anybody heard of snook? You know, we refer to snook as a bass on steroids. And they're almost entirely limited to salt water and brackish water, but they will get landlocked sometimes up in fresh water. And anyway, I call this firehouse snook. And I caught it right behind the firehouse at Cherry in that little swash channel. But tonight I want to talk about how I went from a fishaholic. This I caught right across from the boat ramp at Buzz's Pass in an old bomb crater. And I want to talk about how fishing got me interested in birds, and how studying birds made me a better fisherman. A quick fish story. I went out with my son and his cousin. This old shrimp boat used to be tied up just west of the last toll booth going out to Fort DeSoto. It sat out there for years, and I just knew there was snook under that thing. So I went over and threw a live bait near that boat. Snook took it and ran under the boat and then headed north another 20 or 30 yards. And the best thing you can do about a snook like that is to open the bail, stop putting pressure on him, because as long as he's feeling that thing pulling on its lip, he's going to try to get away from it. So I opened the bail, I jumped out of the boat, and tried to get the line free from all the vegetation and the growth on the underside of the boat. Just couldn't do it. So I had to break the line, pull it loose from all that stuff underneath the boat, retie the line, and then quick reel it in to get the knot onto the reel. And then I went back and pulled him out of the grass about 20, 30 yards north of that boat. But if you ever did much snook fishing, you've got to be pretty hardcore, and you've got sometimes got to do some crazy things to get them into the boat. Okay, so I can't remember who took this photo, but I love taking photos of fish, but I don't really like getting my camera any closer to the water than this. So I got pretty serious with my bird photography. This photo ended up on the cover of a journal. This is Red Sheet, which we'll look at more closely. I've got several photos in this online in this conservation action plan for red sheegrets in part sponsored by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This photo ended up in Audubon County a few years back. And we'll come back to this photo in a minute. I was born into a small Catholic family. Well, it started out kind of small. And eventually 10 siblings. And I don't know how much you know about Catholics, but back then, we had to eat fish on Fridays. There were 10 siblings. My father carried a cast net with him in his truck everywhere he went. This is about 70 years later. There's the 10 siblings with their kids. Did I mention we were Catholic? Anyway. So we ate a lot of mullet. And I don't know if anybody's ever enjoyed mullet. Probably smoked mullet is most pleasing to the most people. But we ate them everywhere you could prepare them. And ate every part of them too, except for the sure enough guts. If you've never had mullet gizzard, fried mullet gizzards, you missed something. And we ate a lot of mackerel too. Mackerel back then were easy to catch. And redfish. I remember having a big, huge redfish at Thanksgiving dinner one year, stuffed with potatoes and carrots and onions. So at a very young age, I learned how to throw a cast net, not just for the mullet, but, and these are little mullet here, they come in all sizes, obviously. But for the live bait that I would use to catch those snook you saw in the first couple photos. And yes?
How's the mullet population doing since they got rid of the cast net?
Oh, it's really helped get rid of net ban. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing to talk about there. But anyway, at the right time of year, and it's not a coincidence that these fish, the fries, show up at about the time that that our seabirds, and especially the shorebirds, nest and raise their young and need tiny fish to feed the kids. These are anchovies here, these are even smaller. And it's real important for serious fishermen. They look for different sizes of bait depending on what they want to catch. And birds even more so, depending on how old the young are. So I like I said, I enjoy photographing fish, and this is not as popular as other bait fish, but is a fish used for fishing. Okay, the whole deal is that these tiny little fish attract the big fish. This is a bonita right here, And these couple photos were taken near the fishing pier at Fort DeSoto. This is a tarpon sucking down a bunch of bait fish out there. And where you see bait fish, you see birds. And so when I first started fishing with my uncle and my grandfather, we'd get out in the boat and head off the beach and we'd look for birds, because the birds would tell us where the bait were, and where you find the bait, there's going to be fish underneath running them to the surface. The larger fish and the birds work together to feed each other. And I began to notice that some of these birds were so beautiful, I wanted to take photos of them, even though there were no fish in the picture. This is the least tern. They're the smallest of our terns, and they eat the smallest of the bait fish. Yeah.
What was your first camera?
Well, my very first camera was a little Instamatic, probably.
Okay, for these photos, sorry.
Hi.
For these photos. What camera did you use for these photos?
Yeah, this is probably Nikon, either 300S or maybe a 5100. Eventually got a D500, and then eventually a D810. So these smaller birds are going to be attracted to these smaller bait fish. This is actually a baby barracuda right here that this least tern has. And in the next couple of months, you'll be able to find them out on the beach in courtship, and part of their courtship behavior is for the male to offer a fish to the female. He's got to prove his ability to feed the kids. This is a least tern with a young chick, probably only a couple days old. And when they first hatch, first come out of the shell, they require some very small fish. This is the sandwich terns with slightly larger fish. But the fish, there's reasons why they go for a certain size fish. They got to be able to carry it if they need to their prospective mate. Pelican's a larger bird, they're more apt to go for a larger fish. Of course, they can hold a lot more. What's the old saying, pelican? Your bill holds more than your belly can. Something like that. Anyway, so they normally go for very large fish. But if you watch pelicans, they will, if nothing else is available, they'll feed on tiny little fish. And the way the fishermen can tell is seagulls will perch on their head if they're catching very tiny fish, because when they expel all the excess water, they invariably lose some of those tiny fish, and the seagulls will be right there to snatch them up. White pelican, we see them in the winter. This one's got a full-grown menhaden, and they, eat some pretty good-sized fish. Now, this is one reason here. If these birds get a fish that's too big, they're going to get other birds trying to grab it away from them because they can't swallow it quick enough. And it's a real problem with nesting colonies. This is actually a remora. A little more elegant shot of a couple of royal terns seen on the beach. You can see these in the next 2 or 3 months out on the beaches, just about anywhere on the beaches of the Gulf of America. This one is wearing his heart on his sleeve. Can you see it?
Yeah.
You see the heart?
Yeah.
But they are so beautiful to watch in the courtship. Not much needs to be said. So here's the one offering a sea robin to the female. Yeah, go out, get out on the beaches in the spring and early summer and enjoy the scenery. Oh, this royal tern here walked around with this squid trying to get a female interested. They all turned their beaks up at him. That dirty face that just didn't find him that attractive. Okay, the first professional bird fisher we're going to look at is one most people are familiar with, and they about 90+% of their diet is fish. This one is rousing his feathers. I'm showing this just because a lot of people have never seen this particular posture, but they're just fluffing up their feathers, shaking loose in the water or dirt, and getting ready to fly. They show up in late September here, and some of them stick around during the rest of the year. Some of them head north up into the Smokies. But in late September, they'll show back up at last year's nest tree if it's still standing. They're very nest loyal. And of course, the most important thing on their minds is preparing for nesting season. I got very lucky one day. I was out photographing some wading birds at Fort DeSoto, and I looked over and saw this eagle landing on the beach. And next thing you know, his mate landed also. And they start tugging on some vegetation that was half buried in the sand. Took them a while to get it loose from the sand and eventually break it up into a couple parts that they could manage, and then carried it off to their nest. They've been nesting for several years in the microwave tower just east of North Beach at Fort DeSoto. It's not the prettiest nest, but sometimes you get real lucky and get them out there away from that tower. Okay, so once they get their nest nourished and put back into shape, they've got to defend it from other bald eagles, from osprey, and even from great horned owls. I've watched great horned owls steal a nest from bald eagles. So about 5 to 10 days after they mate, they'll lay 2 or 3 eggs, two most commonly. And about 35 days later, the eggs will start hatching, and one of the pair will go and get some camouflage for the newly hatched eggs. And they'll start bringing food in. And it's amazing to watch these big parents handling tiny little bits of food for the babies when they're young. There's one with 2 chicks. This nest was down near Lakewood Ranch. And as the chicks get bigger, they have to bring in larger food. This guy gets pretty big. This pair only had 1 chick in this particular year. This nest was right at the approach to the last toll at Fort DeSoto, on the other side of the first duck pond. And this bird is the male is bringing a mullet in. So here's another case for mullet. Did I say that 90+% of their diet is fish? They get in trouble sometimes. They are scavengers, not unlike vultures in a sense. And sometimes they get killed by automobiles picking food up off of the road. And that's where this one, I watched them pick this squirrel up off the road. This picture here shows some fresh pine twig. Those nests get really messy sometimes with all the food. The flies come around, and I've seen eagle nests virtually overtaken with flies. But they'll bring in a fresh branch of pine, and they'll spread that pine tar around the nest and on each other, and use it as an insect repellent. Here's one of the hardest working birds you're going to find. It's another bird of prey, and he eats so much fish he's referred to as a fish hawk, and we know him as an osprey. Here he is rousing his feathers. But they are born with a tackle box at the end of their toes. This is how, weapons of fish destruction. I caught this osprey pulling a ladyfish out of the water alongside the Skyway Causeway. And one of my favorite fish as I grew up, favorite fish to catch, was speckled trout. And I learned later that how much osprey love these speckled trout, eat a lot of them. And they'll tell you where the speckled trout are if you watch them. They'll take it to a perch, and if they have any young, they'll eat the head off of that fish first. Just so it's safer to give to the kids. So these are hard-working birds, and not only do they have to build nests for themselves, they have to defend the nest from other osprey, and like I mentioned before, great horned owls. Great horned owls don't build their own nest, but one of their favorite places to get a nest is steal from osprey. Here's a couple of young chicks nesting in an old cabbage palm that the crown had fallen off of. The tree died, the crown fell off. This is a pretty popular place for great horned owls to nest. This was taken in the Arrowhead picnic area at Fort DeSoto. Another place you'll find them nesting is in a place in a large oak tree where vegetation, leaves, resurrection ferns accumulate naturally. Makes for a good nest site. But like I say, they don't build the nest themselves. You'll notice as I go through, I like taking in flights. And if I have no other reason for showing the photo, it's because I like the photo. Okay, this is to remind you, this osprey is rousing in flight. He just dove, missed the fish, but he was all wet. He's got to get the water off his feathers so he can fly. Anyway, this photo is to remind me. I was on my way out to Fort DeSoto one day, right before you get to the boat ramp, and I watched an osprey fly down and pick up a T-shirt off the road. I didn't get a picture of it. I was driving my car. Anyway, I looked around for 2 days out on Fort DeSoto. Finally found the T-shirt up in the nest at the observation tower over near the Gulf Fishing Pier. The male came in with a fish, gave it to the female, she fed the kids. He immediately walked over to the T-shirt, wiped his face on it. Typical male, right? Anyway, you had to been there. recognize this bird, but next couple months you can go out to Fort DeSoto, and sometimes I've seen as many as 6 of them out there, 6 adults. But this is a reddish egret. He's not a very big bird, but spectacular plumage when the right time of year comes around. They come white and they come in that dark morph we just looked at. In some parts of their distribution, there are actually more whites than dark morphs. Here, the dark morphs outnumber the whites, maybe 10-1. When I first started shooting these reddish egrets, I could go out every morning about 10:30 North Beach, and these two would come around and provide photo ops. But it was a male dark morph and a female white morph. More commonly, you see 2 dark morphs. They're not in breeding plumage, but they continue to bond with each other the rest of the year. Here's the white morph in breeding plumage. The adults you can tell by that long tail. But they will nest in the mangroves right at the top edge of where the red mangroves go to black. You have red mangroves closest to the water, then black mangroves a little bit further back, and then eventually white mangroves. But very difficult to see the nest. There's a male defending the nest. Well, I don't know if it's a male or not, but he was acting like it. This is a young reddish egret. And yeah, if you see them at all in their nesting area, it'll be after they hatch and they get a little size to them. And their first fishing that they do is directly below the nest. And this nest was back behind the Don Cesar out at Paso Grosso. These young will follow the adults around begging food for them. This is a dark pair. They both each have the recessive gene for the white morph. They had a white morph youngster. Pretty cool. And like I said, the youngsters would follow the adults around, beg food for them, until they get, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and then the adults just run them off and tell them, go find your own food. That's what's happening there. This young one doesn't have the long tail feathers and got the butch haircut. Now that same posture you saw of that dark morph defending its nest, they will use that same posture to herd fish. The reddish egret is famous for just how actively he feeds. And a lot of people will call all that movement that you see in these birds, they will call it dancing. But I call it fishing. But they'll run around chasing these fish and get them into smaller herds or schools of fish so they can handle them, catch them. And grab the fish up out of the water and invariably put it into the air so that they can grab just the fish and not any mud or vegetation they might have pulled it out of the water with. They'll get out on the surf, but they prefer to fish up inside where the water's calm. This is to remind me that, look around, if anybody's giving me that look, maybe we should go to another bird. So if you get tired of reddish egrets, just give me this look. This bird, this is a common posture that you'll see. They'll get the umbrella out and provide a little bit of shade. The fish will sometimes swim into the shade. They don't like being in the bright sunlight. And also it cuts down on the glare, so the reddish egret can see the fish a little better. Earlier in the morning, sunrise, doing the same thing, but he had to extend the umbrella out in front of him a little bit more to provide some shade underneath the bird. This is not a fishing posture. They get a little parasite called a louse. It's a hippoboscid, and they will occasionally try to pick them out of their feathers. I don't know whether they eat them or what, but that's pest control right here. And they pick some pretty exotic perches to do that sometimes. Okay, here's one chasing a mullet. They'll grab these little fish that go from the first swash out there back into the shallow water. White morph. Sometimes you can't tell what direction they're going because they zigzag back and forth. And their body has a hard time keeping up with their head sometimes. Here's one providing a little bit of shade. With his head off to the side, get shade on that one side. This one's scaring up a bunch of mullet. And one way that watching these birds will help your fishing, this is a great place to catch redfish and big trout. It's where these tiny little mullet are hanging out in the flats. You see a dark morph here with a few white feathers in it. It's got some of that white morph in it in its background. They will do some hunting from up in the air. It's up at probably 8 or 10 feet up off the ground or off the water. Did I mention I like to take in flights? They do some cooperative fishing with cormorants. Sometimes the cormorant doesn't appreciate his presence, the reddish. And sometimes the reddish try to intimidate the cormorant and let him fish nearby. Red-breasted mergansers come along in the wintertime and they'll stir up fish and the reddish egret will follow right behind them. It gets pretty crazy out there sometimes. There's kind of a little profession. This is looks more like cooperative feeding here. That's a red-breasted merganser. They're kind of like the jet ski of the waterfowl. I'll fly through these pretty quickly here. I like to take photos of fish, and I love it when birds hold the fish just right for me to get a good photo. Can you imagine this bird swallowing this fish? You know they got to take it head first, right? There it goes, down the hatch. Can you imagine the esophagus on that bird?
Oh my God.
And the stomach taking the needlefish, full-size needlefish. There'll be a lot of shrimp during the winter. Flounder, this is a little baby flounder. Anybody know the difference between a flounder and a fluke?
The eyes, position of the eyes.
Close. If you just catch one, it's a fluke. Where's the fish? If you look closely, there is a long-nosed killifish right here in the about to go down the hatch. Now there are some fish that have trouble swallowing. The little pompano and permit, and this is a little skipjack or a leather jacket. They have little tiny spines, sharp as a hypodermic needle. And they just, I've watched them try and try and try again. They just can't swallow them. And this is the reaction many times. They get too close to people, and I wish people wouldn't allow them to take food Some people do. It makes it a little easier. Look how small he is. Bigger than life, this bird. Makes it easier for photographers when they're not afraid of people. Not afraid of secrets? Okay, we'll go to another bird. On the other end of the metabolic spectrum is a little blue heron. They don't have, they're the slowest moving, unlike a red egret, because they don't require a lot of food, because they move so slowly, so they don't need to eat as much. I've never seen one run. I've never seen one spread his feathers or anything. But they're a beautiful bird, just the same. There's one of breeding plumage taken over near Gaither High School in Tampa. A male showing out trying to attract a female. But they just trot along. Sometimes at the edge of the water, sometimes, up to a foot in the water. Here's one picking up a sheep's head minnow. Grab a puffer. This is a little pipefish, which is related to seahorses. They're kind of like a stretched out seahorse. Not a whole lot of nutrition to them, but this is a tonguefish. This is a little sand eel. I like it, the light on it. And I gotta have my compulsory flight shot. If you know anything about how we name birds or how birds are named, if there's a little blue heron, there's probably a big blue heron. But we call it a great blue heron. That's what we're looking at here. Here's a male showing out trying to attract a female. Here's one that was successful at attracting. Got a couple of young ones in the nest. Grumpy and grumpier. But they're big mullet eaters. So I feel kind of a kinship with great blue herons. They do spear some of their fish. This is a great blue over Lake Hancock next to Circle B Bar Reserve over near Lakeland with a catfish. And that's the deepest I've ever seen great blue herons fish. He was in the water up to his belly. Usually they don't like to get their feet, nothing wet above their legs. One with a sand eel. There's one with a seahorse. You'd be amazed at how many seahorses we have in Tampa Bay. It's loaded with them. There's one with an armored catfish on the edge of the Hillsborough River. And I'm so glad that they like to eat these things. They're an invasive fish, and in some places there are just far too many of them.
Yeah, boy, I said.
There's a great blue getting too close. Oh, I call this one Kramer. But he got too close to this nesting colony of black skimmers, and they didn't appreciate it. Check out this. Great blue eating a shark.
That's what it looks like. It is a shark?
Swallowed.
And he swallowed the whole thing.
Wow.
You wonder how they can even fly after they take something like that. But they do it. But they're one of the most beautiful birds. I'll never be tired of looking at them or photographing them. Here's your in-flight. And closely related is a great egret. Very similar in many ways. They spear a lot of fish too, as you can tell by the shape of their beak. A couple young, this nest was over near Gaither High School in North Tampa. So you find them in freshwater and saltwater, like the great blue. A face only a mother could love. Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah.
There's another spearfish. Here's one with a puffer. And finally he decided maybe spear them and let the air out. They're a little easier to swallow that way. Oh, these two. I had a gallery in the Florida Aquarium for about 5 years, and this was one of the photos. Either this one or this one. See the difference?
Yeah.
I cleaned the guts up on the one. I didn't know whether they wanted guts hanging out of a fish. If kids would come on and look at it. I can't remember which one I ended up using. Anyway. This great egret, big huge bird snacking on a tiny little filefish. It's related to the triggerfish family. Very difficult to swallow with that spine. And the only way you can depress that spine is a little trigger on their back that you have to press. Not much meat on them things either. They do eat birds, which reminds me, the great blue heron, you never know what they're going to be walking around with. They'll eat little alligators, birds, frogs, turtles. It's amazing. One of the most beautiful seabirds you'll find, they'll show up in late April and into May, and they'll gather in colonies. They come up from the Caribbean. In the winter, they're down on the coasts of Central and South America. We'll get them up here, like I say, in late spring. And they're here for one reason. But they've got the easiest job in the world when it comes to building a nest. All they do is scrape a little bit of sand out of the beach. And that does a couple things. Gives a place to secure the eggs and stake your territory. But that sand gets so hot later in the spring and early summer, they'll scrape it away to cool things off for the eggs so the eggs don't cook. If they're away from the egg too long, that things will cook. And for the young too. But these birds are designed to do one thing. Got this big, huge head, big neck, and their beak is, let me see if I can zoom in on that. Their beak has a square angle at it. The mandible does. This is the mandible and this is the maxilla, and together they form the bill. But the two beaks, their lower beak has a square corner on it right there, so the water gets shed before it runs up onto the bird and makes it too heavy. It would, it'd just be wasted energy if they had to carry a bunch of water with them when they're trying to catch fish.
What are they called? What bird is that?
That's the black skimmer. Thank you for asking. But they're all wings and beak, and they'll fly around like that. And when they feel their beak come in contact with the fish, they immediately close it up. Here's the one that's flying real close to the beach. And as you might guess, that will wear on that mandibular beak. This picture here shows that lower beak. That bird is just pruning, but you can see growth marks in that lower bill because the lower bill grows twice as fast as the upper to provide for that wear and tear from scraping in the sand when they're feeding it in shallow water. And some of them, they'll be worn way down as short as the other bill, and other ones, they'll be longer, the ones that don't fish in shallow water. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent observing these birds. This black skimmer, I got photobombed by a couple of roseate spoonbills. This one either hit something in the water, hit some sand or something, and he got a bath. And like I say, when they feel a fish with that lower beak, they'll close them up, and their head will have to get them. That takes some strong neck. And their wings will move forward and provide some lift up front so they don't somersault in the water. Those wings moving forward, providing that extra lift, will keep it, the front of the bird up. It's fascinating. Here's one just grabbed a fish out of the water. This one here is actually getting wet on purpose to cool off. Even more so this one. They will literally take a bath in flight to cool off. It gets so hot out there. Here's an adult keeping the young from cooking in the sun. Yeah, this is a baby, very young chick. And notice, do you see the fish? Look how tiny that fish is. Can you imagine how sensitive the adult has to be? How sensitive the bill has to be to catch something that small? It's just mind-boggling. Look, this guy fell over looking up at the fish up there. He couldn't figure out how to get it. But they have to give them the right size fish. If they try to give them a fish that's too big and it takes too long for them to swallow it, crows and seagulls will come in and steal the fish right out of the middle of the nesting colony. Here's one with a ballyhoo. The parents trying to decide if that's too big for the bird. We've got to make sure the bird is real hungry before they give it to him. Look how big that fish is. But it is amazing how large a fish these birds can swallow. That's a hard act to swallow. This one got so tired trying to take that thing down. He just got exhausted and took a nap in the middle of his meal. That's a mullet. So as the chicks get bigger, they go out and get bigger fish for them. This is a freshwater bass. And I've noticed that a lot of these local colonies, they will choose a nesting site that has the option of freshwater fish nearby. If the water gets really stirred up and the weather gets real bad out there and the kids get hungry, they'll go inshore and catch brackish and fresh fish to bring to the kids.
Do the male and female both fish alike for the baby?
Yeah, they take turns. Male's a little bit bigger, got a little square head on him. Now these very young black skimmers, from a very young age, they start getting ready to catch fish themselves. They will assume that posture that eventually they'll use flying. And they'll walk around just picking up little sticks or whatever, pretending they're fishing. They'll get out on the beach, walk along in the very shallow water. This is all about learning how to fish. Eventually, they'll be flying and doing that, probably at about 4 months. And they'll carry vegetation around like they would a fish. I've seen bald eagle, a lot of different birds do that. The young ones will do things that you normally expect adults to do. Not really knowing why they do it, they just do it. Here's one very young bird out trying to catch his own fish. And darn, if I didn't catch one grabbing a fish out of the water, a juvenile black skimmer. Okay, I don't know how much time we have, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I wanted to share with you, even though I don't have the actual photos, and sorry, but we have 3 local birds that use fishing lures. They'll use lures to catch fish. The green heron, I watched the green heron out at Carolyn over St. Pete. Take little twigs, drop it in the water, and wait for tiny little fish to come to the twigs, and then catch the fish. They'll do it over and over again. It's amazing.
Wow.
The snowy egret is another one that'll do something like that. I watched them stick their beak down in the water and vibrate their tongue. And you'll see the water vibrating and little bubbles coming up. And it attracts the little fish. And the snowy will catch the fish and eat it. The birds are pretty smart. Of course, they do this for a living, you know. I watched this black-crowned night heron over at Redis Lake Park. I watched him for a long time because he seemed like he knew what he was doing. He came up with his tiny little shrimp, freshwater shrimp, but he didn't eat it. I said, what in the world is he doing? Why isn't he eating it? He made he broke up a little place in the vegetation there, and stuck that shrimp down in there and caught a fish. He used the shrimp as a lure. Pretty amazing. Okay, a little bit of color to wrap things up. These were taken down at the celery fields, Sarasota, which they're trying to take away from us, trying to develop. One of our more beautiful birds. Well, they're all beautiful. Thanks for watching.
Okay, I know we're supposed to end about 8, but we want to get a few questions in. I know there's 1,000 questions, so we'll try to spend. Everybody okay with say 10 minutes for questions? Okay, and I'll take the microphone around or not speak up, so Jim.
Hi, this is my first experience of your photos. I'm in complete awe of how beautiful they are. So I'm sorry that I don't know anything about you, but did you have formal training as a photographer, or does this clearly come out out of your passion for birds and fish?
I do have a little website if you want to see some of my photos. There's some of them. You can have my photos put on shopping bags. Anyway, if you go to JimGrayImages.com, that's JIMGRAY, JimGrayImages, no spaces.com. I've got some photos there. If nothing else, enjoy looking at the photos.
Were you trained as a photographer or strictly just hobby?
I just learned on my own.
Yeah.
Jim, a lot of your photos are taken at Port DeSoto, and I know the North Beach is still closed and the east side's been open, but what do you know about the damage that's been done to the trees and the habitat there and the chances for it to get back the way it was?
As much as you do, sorry. Yeah, apparently a lot of damage was done to the infrastructure. They've had to redo the electric and the water and everything out there, so it's taking a very long time. They just did, figured they would work more efficiently if there weren't people around. I'm sure it changed the topography out there though.
Just for your information, Trout Creek, Sergeant Parker, and Morris Bridge, Alderman Ford were all closed until further notice. Anybody else got a question over here? Other questions over here? There you go.
I was just wondering about the hurricane and the effect on the birds. During the hurricanes, I always wonder what they're doing out there. Can you speak to that at all?
They're hiding in the bushes. They're kind of like a cat, knowing how to stay out of trouble when the weather gets bad.